So, in your video explaining internal torque on stiff-legged deadlift, you mentioned that many people start the pull with external torque, which makes it a quad-dominant exercise. Obviously, if your goal is to strengthen the inner hamstrings, a stiff-legged deadlift would be best. But what if you are coaching an athlete who wants to hit a max deadlift PR? Would you coach them to do the lift stiff leg, or would you coach them to bring in the quads as well? Is it possible to use quads if you're applying internal torque? It's a very, very good question, and I'm going to answer that because I like that one a lot. And I'm surely going to use the video of that for the YouTube channel. So let's start with me explain to you why I don't want external rotation on a hinge, right? I'm not talking about the first pull in Olympic weightlifting, which is a squat pattern, therefore external rotation. Talking about if we do a deadlift, that pull is a hinge, therefore internal rotation. Why? The point of external rotation is to anchor, like, you go like this, by externally rotated like this, you get the side joint locked into place. Why? So that you can transfer the power of the legs into the hips without losing power because of the swivel of the torso. Right? That's the point of external rotation, is to stabilize the side joint, to lock the hips in a way, right? So really the point of external rotation is to kill the swivel. That's the point of external rotation, and you need that on the squat. Do you want to kill a swivel on a hinge pattern though? If you kill the swivel on a hinge pattern, you are turning the movement into a flexion extension of the spine. So it'd be quads, flexion extension of the spine. That means back extension, right? So at a lower weight, you can keep using your legs, keeping your back straight because it's a back extension. But when you reach the limit of your strength on the back extension, then eventually the second they pull, you can see the back doing like this, which is a lot in deadlifting when people give up. And their lower back, I'm not talking about the upper back running, I'm talking about the lower back giving up completely, and they start to do that weird thing, that the cat lifting. It's because they reach the limit of their back extension. A back extension is not as strong as a hinge, right? So I need people to hinge to internal rotate on a hinge. Is a deadlift a hinge? Yes, it is. So to go back to your question, now, do I want people to stiff leg their max rep deadlift? No, I do not. The reason for that is it's a reason for mobility. Mobility is range of motion while maintaining the proper torque, right? As range of motion increases, leverage decreases, right? So the higher your hips are in the air, now eventually your leverage is going to start to decrease. Leverage decreases means you can apply less torque. Less torque means less strength. So there's always a moment, or if you go toward a stiff leg, where you're going to start losing torque. When that happens, you won't be able to be as strong. I don't want that, right? If you start too low though, you'll notice when people deadlift, they start very low. They're not able to internally rotate properly, engage that inner hammy. That is why when they start lifting, their butt goes up first, they find the torque, and then they start lifting. So the key is, yes, I don't want people to go into stiff leg. To go to stiff leg a deadlift with very heavy weight will require you to have great mobility, as in full torque for that weight, because it's relative to the weight you're lifting. At the end of the range of motion, unless you're like a Sam dancer, you're not going to be able to create that much torque at the end of your range of motion, because your mobility is not great enough. Mobility being range of motion while maintaining torque. So that's why I don't want you to stiff leg, because you will lose strength. If your butt starts too low, you're not able to create as much internal rotation. That's also poor mobility, because you cannot engage your inner hammy, and then your hips are going to go higher. So where is your starting position? As high as your hips can be without losing torque, and not too low that your hips doesn't move when you start loading. That's the perfect hip position when you start on your deadlift. So will you use your quads in that sense? You will always use your quads on a deadlift, and I'll explain to you why, and that's part of the issue. The weight is outside of your hands, right? So you have the bar bends, the weight being on the outside, it's taking you toward external rotation. The weight on a barbell, not on a sandbag, not on a stone, because on a sandbag and a stone, the weight is inside of your hands, which takes you toward internal rotation naturally. That's why it's a natural movement. The barbell is an unnatural movement in the sense of the weight is not being in your hands, which is what we've been doing for 200,000 years, lifting things in between our hands, because you have to grab them first, right? With a barbell, the weight is on the outside. Biomechanically, it changes, not even biomechanically, mechanically, it changes the leverage, right? It takes that torque that goes toward the external rotation. So a barbell naturally will engage your quads because it will naturally drive you toward external rotation. Problem is that goes against evolution because everything we've been doing in that particular motion was more toward the internal rotation. So you have to understand that when you deadlift outside of a full stiff leg, which does not allow any kind of rotation, the second you bend a little bit where you find your strength, your quad will engage anyway. The point now is we don't want to go into complete external rotation because that goes against what we the way we are built. That goes against the hinge pattern. So you're going to have to fight that external rotation, but you're not going to be able to annulate it completely because the weight is taking you that way. So no matter what on a deadlift, your quads will always engage. But that is because of the leverage itself. What you're going to have to do is fight that external rotation through internal rotation to make sure your inner hamstrings stay engaged, allowing you to be the strongest possible in a correct movement pattern. That's why you don't need to focus on that when you do a sandbag, because you already internally rotated, so you don't have to focus on internally rotating more. So it's not a problem. And the second you lift, if you look at a stone or a sandbag, it looks like a stiff leg. You can't really put your quads into it. Your hips shoot up, you mostly do a stiff leg, and then the second pull, you put your butt under, then it becomes a squat pattern. Now you start to externally rotate. So it's a stiff leg going into a squat. That's how you lift a stone. That is a natural movement. The deadlift is not, because you are using a bar and the weight is on the outside of your hands, kind of reversing the torque. And so that's why I don't want people to do a stiff leg, because that's the end of the range of motion. They're losing too much torque to be truly powerful. I don't want their hips to go low because they can't internally rotate and their hips are going to shoot up anyway, and you have to find that balance. And third of all, I want you to fight that it's external rotation that comes naturally from using a barbell, so that you don't go from a hinge pattern to a squat pattern. Well, I hope that makes sense. Bam, that goes on YouTube.